Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Thanasis Ziogas, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Economic Geography at the University of Groningen. The title of today's presentation is A Bigger Bang for Your Buck, Source of Income and Happiness. And as the title suggests, what I'm going to examine is how different sources or components, if you wish, of income are related, so not only income from labor, are related with different measures of subjective well-being. This is a joint work with my supervisors, Dimitris Ballas, Serjan Koster, and Arian Edges. So I don't know what kind of background information I should give to this audience because you are all of us probably most experienced than me. But I will talk briefly about the interplay between income and happiness. And Easterlin is among the first researchers that used happiness data in economics. He used aggregated country-level data, and he observed that even though there are some countries that experience high levels of growth in their GDP, the levels of happiness for these countries remain constant throughout the years, regardless of the predictions of economic theory, where increases in income are supposed to lead in increases in the well-being of a nation. This is known in the literature as Easterlin's paradox. Then researchers started using individual-level data, and they applied macroeconometric specifications of happiness. They found that income is indeed one of the main components of happiness and of utility, of happiness equations. However, they found not only absolute income effects, but also they found evidence of relative income effects. So individuals care not only about their own level of income, but also where they stand in relation to other individuals, so what other individuals also receive. Subsequent studies started examining the geographical level that these relative comparison effects are more likely to take place. And they suggest that local and more disaggregated levels of comparisons are more informative because individuals are care more and can relate with others in their immediate vicinity rather than what is happening when the reference group consists of the entire country or of the entire region. Closely related to the literature of income comparison effects is the literature that examines social norms and stigma effects, with particular emphasis on unemployment. And as with income effects, individuals care not only about their own employment status, but also of the employment status of others, and in particular, in the unemployment status of others. And there is a quote that I really like from a paper of 2003 of Clark in the Journal of Labor Economics, if I'm not mistaken, that says that unemployment hurts, but it hurts less when more people are unemployed in the area. So we have this kind of social norms and the comparisons that take place. So what is the motivation behind this study? We have a twofold motivation. First, there's a lively debate in the last couple of years about the unconditional universal basic income. For those of you that you're not familiar with the basic income, is a payment, and the keyword here is unconditional. So everyone receives this kind of payment to all individuals in a country in order to reduce poverty and income inequality, but also to give individuals a possibility to reach their potential, to have a safety net that they can do things that they wouldn't do otherwise. And what we are using in this data, in this paper later on, we are using conditional social transfers and social benefits, which we argue that they have an opposite effect. Instead of giving people an opportunity of independence, they do actually the opposite. And the second part of motivation is more practical one. It has to do with the lack of studies that use that they break down the total income of individuals into various income components. I'm familiar of only one study that does that. It's Antonis, Conchitas, and Marcus, that they use disaggregated income data, but not in the exact same way we do it in this paper. And so we are interested in this paper to break down income and examine each of these components separately. So we have two broad research questions in this paper. The first one reads, does the composition of income has an effect upon the well-being of individuals? And the second one, we try to address similar questions to the following. How would two otherwise similar individuals experience the effect of income if, for example, the first one earns £2,000 from labor, so he or she deserves that because he worked for that, and how somebody else receives the same amount of money through unemployment benefits, for example, or any other social benefits. And our contribution is, as I said before, twofold again. We break down the individual components of income and we examine how they are related with measures of well-being. And we highlight the importance of social capital at the local level that helps individual basically absorbs some of the negative effects that the social benefits might have towards individuals' well-being. So we are building our conceptual framework having in mind the association between income inequality and happiness. And we all know that income inequality is detrimental for individuals' well-being. And here we follow a similar rationale by saying that apart from the difference in the levels of income between individuals, what also matters is the difference in the composition of income within individuals. So how an individual has different sources of income and what are the levels of this income. Also, in relation to that, there are other studies that show that the means by which individuals earn their income also matters for their well-being. And there's a paper of our keynote before Binder and the Code in 2015 paper that they found that even though self-employed individuals usually earn less compared to regular employment individuals, the levels of happiness for the former are higher compared to the latter. And similar, as we said before, with the income comparison effects, and also Kelsey mentioned yesterday that general welfare state positively relates with nations' subjective well-being. If we can make a critique here is that the problem that I identify in this paper, in this kind of papers, is that the level of aggregation, because they look aggregated level data between countries, and this might conceal the individual effect of social benefits towards individuals. And there are other studies and theories that say that individuals do not like to live off others and they feel dependent from the country. So this is the rationale that we follow in this paper. And as I mentioned before, the social capital is also important at the low level geography because it helps people feel less stigmatized by receiving social benefits that would otherwise experience if they were living in a region with lower levels of social capital. So to address part of this research question that I briefly mentioned, I'm using cross-sectional survey data from the United Kingdom collected in 2009. So I'm sure that many of you have used data from Understanding Society. In the sample, we have 36,000 observations. So they are individuals. And these individuals are nested within the 380 local authority districts in the United Kingdom. This dataset, as you probably know, have a battery of well-being measures and also different components of income, as well as many socio-demographic, the standard controls that we use in happiness situations, and also social capital related questions. I'm not going to talk about the validity of this of these measures. This is the safest, let's say, in a conference that I can present happiness data. I don't need to defend that. And there are many much better than me that work in this area. I just want to say here that I'm using, for the great part of the paper, I'm using subjective mental health captured by the general health questionnaire that has 12 questions. And also I'm using the life satisfaction, the overall life satisfaction question. So the former spans from 0 to 36, and we have recoded the variables so as higher levels of this variable capture better mental status. And also life satisfaction that starts from 1 to 7, with 7 being completely satisfied with life. And in the appendix of the paper, and also maybe some graphs here, we are using 4 more subjective well-being data to see whether there are some differences between them. So briefly about our empirical strategy. First, I'm going to present some discrete statistics, some distributions of the variables. Then I'm going to use some sequential, I call it sequential because each time we add extra explanatory variables to see whether the results hold. So first we start with the sources of income only, then we add socio-demographic characteristics, and at the end we also control for social capital characteristics. I have also added here in the 2 bullet points the variables that we are control both for socio-demographic and social capital characteristics. And at the last part of the paper, I'm also using some propensity score matching techniques in order to see whether the treatment, and by treatment here we mean individuals receiving social benefits, whether this treatment has a negative or a positive effect upon the well-being of individuals. Basically, this is pretty much. So I haven't seen many distributions of the variables, and I was surprised in the conference. So we all know that they have this left-skewed common distribution. Here I have the mental health, general health questionnaire, and the overall life satisfaction, pretty common, nothing new here. And here I have the same histograms, but differentiate between different income recipients. And we see that the darker gray color here with social capital, for both of the variables, it's always lower compared to other income recipients. So, for example, as the entire sample, which is the average of everything, but also we can see that those individuals receiving investments, they have some sort of income from investments, they have much higher life satisfaction and mental health. Here, I have some scatter plots to also further validate some of the previous findings. We have a scatter plot between subjective well-being variables and age, and we differentiate by the sex of individuals. Another common finding in the literature that the mental health of women is lower compared to men. Here we see that the blue line is below the red one. But on the other hand, life satisfaction, it seems that women do relatively slightly better. And also from this scatter plot, we can also get the U-shape somehow relationship between income and well-being, even though it's not a panel data set. So we just see the cohorts of, not the cohorts, the age of individuals in our sample, how they relate with their well-being at the aggregated, when we aggregate their levels. And here I do similar thing as before, but now I differentiate, instead of the sex, I differentiate between if someone receives social benefits and not. And we see that the drop, it's much more intense compared to we saw before. And this is the case when the social benefits, it's yes. So when someone receives social benefits, we see from the descriptive angle that they experience a much drop in their well-being, either mental health or life satisfaction. And this is the first regression. Actually, there are many regressions. There are a table of 12, I think, yes. So first, I start with, I said that it's a sequential procedure. First, I don't differentiate between income, and I use the total personal income. So there are two panels. The left panel, up to here, I'm using the mental health, and in the second panel, I'm using the life satisfaction. We see that the total personal income at least seems to be positively related with mental health, but is negatively related, even though it's not statistically significant, with life satisfaction. And it is, as Anthony said yesterday, these things seems to be easy to reverse, because when I add controls, or demographic controls here, I get a flip sign also with, well, life satisfaction doesn't flip sign, but it gets significant, and it's not positive as we would expect, it's negative. Then this is how we came across this idea. Why don't we differentiate? Why don't we break down income to see the different components of income? So then we have the third row. We use only income from labor in the second row, which is positively statistically significant for both of the dependent variables. The third row, we say, okay, now we need to examine each source of income. And we see that the social benefits are highly negative and statistically significant. And this doesn't change no matter if we control for demographic characteristics and for socio-demographic and social capital characteristics, for both for mental health and for life satisfaction. And I hope that these results belong to this 30% that Anthony mentioned that doesn't change. I hope so. We have made many robustness checks, and we also always get a negative relationship between social benefits and subjective well-being. And don't forget that in socio-demographic characteristics, we also control for someone being unemployed. So it's not that it captures the effect of being unemployed. Then, what we're doing next is we replicate these findings, these three rows and these three rows. So when we have all sorts of income without any controls, which is demographic and social capital and socio-demographic, using quantile regressions to see whether the relationship is always negative or positive, or whether there are nonlinearities between the dependent variable and the distribution of the dependent variable and the independent variable. So we see here no controls, only the source of income. All of the graphs seem to have start from positive values and drop all the way to zero, and the only exception is the social benefit income, which starts from negative values and goes up all the way up to zero. So for individuals belong to the lowest part of the distribution of the dependent variable, the social benefits are even more detrimental for them. Then we control for socio-demographic, same pattern, even though it's more clear now. And when we also control for social capital, we get exactly the same pattern as before. And the same we do for a life satisfaction variable without any controls, with social demographic, and then also with social capital. I was using so far the log levels in order also to capture the diminishing marginal utility of income. But we said, okay, maybe it's better to try different specifications. Why don't we use a dummy instead of the log level? So first we use dummy. So we have only the monthly net labor income in levels, in log levels basically, and then all of the sources of income are with dummies. Again, we get a negative and statistically significant coefficient for social benefits. But dummies, there is a problem with the dummies, because if someone receives social benefits and the social benefits is £1 per month, we don't really can say that this individual relies on social benefits. So we need to have also a threshold effect. We need to have a higher amount of income, of social benefits income, for someone to assume that can be stigmatized by the social benefits. So instead of the social of the dummies, we create dummies again, but using the 10% threshold. So if someone receives social benefits and the social benefits, the amount of social benefits exceeds the 10% of the mean value of social benefits, then we assume that he or she receives social benefits. And the coefficients get even higher. So the higher the amount of social benefits for the dummy, the more detrimental the effect. And we do that also for the 25%. Same results. The coefficient of the dummy of social benefits gets higher and higher every time we increase the threshold. Final step, we instead of the log levels or the dummies, we used the share of social benefits, or basically the share of all sources of income. So we calculate what is basically we divided each source of income with the total income in order to have the share of each source of income in your well-being. And we didn't, of course, add the share of labor income because we would have multicollinearity. Everything will add to 1. So we have only the labor income in logs, and then we have the share of benefits. Again, with the share of benefits, we have negative effect towards the well-being of individuals, either mental health or life satisfaction. And the last thing I mentioned is using some propensity score matching techniques to give a more causal flavor in the paper. So, I forgot some of my slides. I return again back to the first regression table that I showed you, which I'm using the log levels together with life satisfaction and mental health, and I'm conducting some interactions to see whether different groups of individuals behave differently compared to regarding the well-being. So we have an interaction with the sex of individuals. As from the scatter plots I showed you, the interaction between social benefits and sex, it's more detrimental for females because they have lower value. However, men decrease even more. And the same pattern we have for the life satisfaction. So life satisfaction, women experience higher levels of life satisfaction. So they start from a higher level. But the big picture here is that all four plots here have a negative slope. So increases of social benefits lead to decreases of life satisfaction, assuming that you receive social benefits. Then I make an interaction between the social benefits and the age of individuals. And we see that the lighter the color, it's more detrimental for someone's well-being, either mental health or subjective well-being. So we see that the worst area that someone can belong is being around the age of 50 or 60 and has a high amount of social benefits. So this makes you belong in this category of subjective well-being. Younger individuals and those that they are very old, but especially if you receive a small amount of social benefits, makes you belong in higher levels of well-being. And the last graph that we did an interaction is an interaction between social capital variables and social benefits. And again, we see that if someone receives a big amount of social benefits, he or she belongs again in the gray area. So the life satisfaction, the mental health is rather low compared to the others. However, we see here that if the individual social capital is quite high, no matter the level of social benefits, this individual belongs always to the highest category of either subjective mental health or subjective life satisfaction. So indifferent of the level of log social benefits, social capital can act as a buffer that protects individuals from the negative effects that social benefits might have. And now it's the slide I mentioned before that we try to give a more causal flavor in the paper. I mentioned that we are using propensity score matching, but as I used the dummies before, here we also have the same problem that in order to create the treatment group and the control group, we need to be somehow more certain that individuals receiving social benefits are indeed stigmatized. However, if you only receive 1 or 2 pounds per month, you cannot really say that you are stigmatized. So we need to come up with different thresholds of income that someone can assume that he can be stigmatized. So we are using 3 different scenarios. Basically, the upper panel has mental health, the general health questionnaire. The bottom panel has overall life satisfaction. We are using 2 different matching techniques, either nearest neighbors or kernel-based matching. And we examine 3 different treatment groups. The first one consists that if someone receives social benefits, at the level of these social benefits, it's more than half the labor income for the entire population. So in here, we also include zeros. Someone might receive 0 labor income. We also include that. Then we make a similar, very, very similar threshold, but we only add positive values of social benefits. And the third group, we have social benefits that exceed the value of 0. So this is, let's say, the most inclusive one. Even if you receive 1 pound, then you belong in the treatment group, and we assume that you can be stigmatized. We see that the coefficient is always negative and highly statistically significant. And I remind you, the mental health variable spans from 0 to 36. The life satisfaction variable spans from 1 to 7. And we some sort have the same ratio between the variables. So if we somehow multiply this coefficient by 5, we are close to this. So, but these coefficients you can see, and you are familiar with the literature, are substantial in terms of well-being. So in the scale from 0 to 36, if you experience a drop, and let's take only this scenario, which is the best for individuals, it can still make you experience a reduction in your well-being of about minus 0.2. So to wrap up, using some scatter plots and some basic regressions, we confirm some of the previous findings of subjective well-being literature. I examined, as I mentioned, the different sources or components of income. We indeed observe some compositional effect of well-being towards individuals. Using the quantile regressions, we have this nonlinear relationship between the independent variables and the distribution of the dependent variable. And finally, we have some evidence for causal relationship running from social benefits to subjective well-being. And what we still need to address somehow is maybe we have some family income effects. So even though I'm using individual level data and I'm using individual income, if I cohabitate and I might receive nothing, but my wife has a lot of money, I still might be less stigmatized, or I don't mind that much about my situation being poor. So we consider to restrict the analysis to households that have only one individual, so to eliminate the household income effects. And also we are thinking of ways to conduct propensity score matching in different segments of the society. So to restrict, for example, the analysis in the high social capital local authority districts and to low social capital local authority districts. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I honestly think you should look at family incomes, because if you look now only at individual incomes, I had a question in mind: how could you come up with a situation where individuals who get exactly the same earnings, exactly the same capital income, if you think about regression framework, you know, how would one get social benefits and the other one would not get social benefits? Because you're in exactly the same income situation, you know, if you think about regressions, how you run it. And at the end, then it comes either to eligibility criteria, why someone is eligible, another one not, or non-take up. And I think you are in your regressions, like by this framework, you're really catching up family incomes and what happens, why one person has, I don't know, educational benefits and the other one does not, etc. Or social assistance, whatever.
So if I understand correctly, you agree that restricting the analysis to single household individuals?
Yeah, it might be a nice sensitivity check, but yeah, social benefits are usually a kind of also family income based, like at least some of them, you know. And looking at family income is really important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very good to see this kind of granular analysis of income. I'm afraid I missed it, but I'm wondering if you controlled for physical health and functioning, because I think you've controlled out unemployment. And I'm worried that what we've got here is really a health effect rather than a recipient of social benefit, because one of the key drivers, and it's particularly related to that 50 to 60 age range, where a lot of the people receiving social benefits there are not in work because they've got health complaints. So I'm a little bit worried that what you're really showing is the impact of being in poor health on subjective well-being rather than the impact of receiving benefit on subjective well-being. I think that's another question.
Mine's really close to what Carrie said, but I was going to ask what type of benefits there are, because in the United Kingdom, yes, okay, we have an employment benefit, but we also have personal independence payments, we have disability benefit, we've got child tax credit. So I felt as though just controlling for unemployment to account for the diversity of benefit that you can get was missing an option. And I felt as though we should probably also control for inactivity, and inactivity would then be covering those in poor health and who are in receipt of benefits for those reasons. So related point.
I mentioned in one of the slides that the socio-demographic variables that I control in the regressions, and I had the job status. In the job status, there is a category whether someone is sick or disabled to work. So I think that in a way, this captures the effect of the objective health that might lead some of the results. The job status. In the job status, there is a category.
Sorry. So there's gradients of health and there's functioning within health. So it's a very crude way of understanding whether or not somebody is in health. And I think the point about looking at the type of benefit would solve it in a way. That would give you really crisp clarity on it at least.
Okay, thanks. And for your question, as you might know from the Understanding Society data, this is the first breakdown of the total net income, but then we can also further break down these variables, and there are actually 41 components that we can further break down these six sources of income. And as a matter of fact, out of the 41, 30 sources of income consist the social benefits, and we're using all of them. And it's exactly what you mentioned before. All of them are included in our social benefit category.